Where do you think this love for colors, this love for texture, where do you think it started for you?
So I've kind of allowed the color to take over the the process, be like the thing that gets me excited to sit down and paint. I would love to be a more prolific artist, but at the same time, would my paintings be mine? Would they look the way they did if I didn't have this kind of tug of war with time? If you're not living off of your sales of artwork, I think it helps a little bit if you have another source of income so that every brushstroke doesn't feel so catastrophic if you mess up. Because I have this weird idea that like if everything is perfect in your surroundings, the design, the positioning, everything is staged perfectly, then everything's going to go smooth in life.
Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
I am very good, thanks. Happy to be here.
Yes, same. More than happy to have you. Okay, Ali. Okay, first, how do I pronounce your name?
Allie.
Ali. I get so confused with names. My goodness. Okay, welcome to the podcast, Ali. I'm very excited to speak to you and learn more about you and share with our listeners. But before we go and dive into it, um, tell me something. Were you always um, a very dreamy fantasy child? Because your work primarily focuses on, these fantasies, and you have these exaggerated, but also like real life, like they do feel like, of course, the colors are accentuated and all of that, but also very like a scene from a bedroom or a living room. So first, let's start with your from the beginning. Were you someone who was very dreamy, or as a child, who were you as a child?
That is a good question. I think so. I always loved color. I was always wearing crazy mismatched outfits, and no, my poor mom couldn't convince me to wear anything else. So I looked a little crazy. Um, and I think just like being excited by color and pattern was kind of just like my essence from an early age. And I think I definitely stayed in that. I think all children, fantasize, and it's part of developing your brain. Um, but maybe I just never totally left it. Yeah.
Even when I was looking at your Instagram and I was seeing your travels, and I've spoken to so many people, but something really struck to me was your destinations, in the sense of you were in Bali, and then you were in Morocco, and then all these places, India. We all have a very similar and shared aesthetic, in the sense of the colors, in the sense of textiles, and in the sense of patterns, and like it's a huge burst of inspiration for people like us who have that kind of inclination.
India is next on my list.
When are you
I would
coming?
love to get there. I don't know, but when I do, I would love to get together.
Yes, absolutely.
But yes, the colors, the beads, the textures, everything in India. I buy a lot of clothes from India.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, when I was in France, I found that most of the clothing I was buying was made in India. So there's something, I have this draw to it. So I was very excited to learn of your podcast.
Where do you think this love for colors, this love for texture, where do you think it started for you? Like, um, your influences, also in real life, like, were you surrounded by that, or are you looking for that in your own work? How is that working for you?
I'm trying to figure out why color is so important to me, but I have established in the past recent years that that is the most exciting aspect of the studio process and creating is to develop color palettes and create just unusual color combinations. It makes my eyes happy. It puts me in a good mood. I think it has the biggest effect on me and a lot of other people when they look at art. So I've kind of allowed the color to take over the process, be like the thing that gets me excited to sit down and paint. Um, is figuring out like a color palette, and how that's going to create a narrative and a mood. Um, and um, I can't pinpoint how it became so important, but I do try to. I do have a lot of colorful surroundings. You can kind of see in my background a little bit.
I love your background as well. That's what I'm saying. Like, I can feel that energy in a lot of things that you do.
The rest of my house gets even crazier. And then as a kid, I painted every wall a different color. It just sets up a an ambiance that I think I was thinking about how I was going to describe my current work to you because it changes, as you're making it. And like I'm so interested in how one's environment and interior design and the colors you surround yourself with affect your psyche, your mood, your interactions with people. So in a way, I'm channeling this love of interior design and being a set designer and a costume designer. Like I get to take on like a million different roles in my paintings, which is really fun because I don't really know what I'm doing outside of painting, but I get to pretend that I'm a landscape architect. I can do lighting design. So it's like this imaginary hypothetical world, but color seems to come first as a priority.
Yeah. And did you, in what was it for you, like in the beginning, while you were started? Were you always like, how has your own journey as an artist started for you? Did you always think about becoming an artist? Did you think that would be something that you'll put on your plate?
I did. I come from a family of teachers and a psychologist. Yeah. And so it wasn't, they definitely were encouraging uh, my art practice. It seemed to be the thing that came most easily to me. So I'm very grateful that they pushed it. My parents gave me art lessons. Um, Probably when I was 12, I started art lessons outside of school. Um, but I was always just drawing, and it was encouraged. And people, my friends, cheered me on and wanted to learn from me. I would give them art lessons, and even though I didn't really know what I was doing. Um, and and so it just became like a known thing that I would do something in art, but don't think it I think even as a kid I knew that it was going to be very hard to be just an artist. So I knew that like maybe I would be a graphic designer, and then I learned I didn't love digital art. I thought maybe I might go into fashion design.
Wouldn't that be exciting because you have that love for textiles and because I share that interest?
I I think that I knew I'd be doing something in the arts, but really wasn't sure if I could be an artist primarily. And so, art teacher as a way to keep some stability in my life. I loved once I started teaching my friends, and teaching other and working at a camp. I knew that teaching art was something I definitely wanted to do, and I enjoyed it as much as making the actual art. So they kind of feed one another, the teaching and the art making. And sometimes they also take away from each other because there's just not enough time in the day. But teaching art will always be a passion of mine.
I love that. How do you think that I'm interested in how where you're taking your inspiration from? These scenes that I like, that I was seeing in your work, um, they feel like fleeting moments. A lot of them I can see you, but it also feels like a life lived into it. Like, so where do you find what is your process look like? How do you approach your work? Tell me more about it.
So I can say that like the work started out as like a lot of kind of mental collaging, like when I was in college. Like I would have like collage, like cut out from magazines and kind of rearrange images to kind of create these secret hideouts that were these like fantasy worlds that you could escape to. Um, and so I would find just kind of I would have folders, like physical folders of, fabric folds in different ways, and like a folder for flowers, a folder. I was just always collecting. I'm like, I think like collecting imagery and objects is just like the funnest way to live your life. It's just like everything is just a discovery. Um, and I approach my travels like that, and my daily walks. I'm always looking for something new, a new design and architecture that I haven't noticed. So in the olden days, I would have physical folders. Now I have a lot of digital folders with tons of images and photographs, and I'm running out of storage space everywhere, so I don't know what to do. And so I would do it. And so a lot of people thought I used Photoshop to collage images, but I really hated it, so I didn't. Um, and it would take a long time to make my paintings, and it still does, but things have sped up a bit.
How typically how long does it take for you?
Oh boy, it depends on how big it is. The brainstorming process can be a while, and I'm a little bit obsessive. So, I mean, I've spent like 8, 9 months on a painting before that's large, and that's like not probably that normal. Um, and but things are going quicker now. So like I started out doing these kind of mental collages, then eventually I did in graduate school I experimented with abstraction and just kind of no plan mushing paint around on my panels. I paint on wood panel, and then extracting like the images from the abstraction, like almost like when you look at a cloud and you see a dog in the clouds. So I would try to pull out imagery from the abstraction, which kind of gave me this cool tension between loose painting and
Yeah, and then
tight.
figuration.
Yeah. And so that was really exciting, but sometimes that would take even longer. And it was supposed to be a method that was going to be quicker. Because I was like, oh, I don't have to plan anything. This will go quicker. It did not, because there was no guarantee that it would like come together. Some did, some didn't. So that's a fun thing to kind of go back to here and there, that process. But it was became eventually too mentally taxing. Um, and then in the past few years, which is the most recent work on my Instagram, I have yet to update my website with it. That will happen soon. And a lot of those are from photographs from my travels, from daily life. And I take the composition from a photograph that has some interesting arrangement of objects or lighting or whatever it is, or textures. And then I now do use some digital technology, but it's Procreate.
Oh,
Have you ever used
yes,
Procreate?
yes.
Yeah. So I had to learn it for teaching, and it ended up being really useful in my own practice. So I love when that happens. Um, and so I'll take a photograph and put it into Procreate, and then I will color on top of it and experiment with like a million different versions of different color palettes that enhance the photo. And by the end, often it looks completely different than the original photo, because then I might like digitally collage other objects in. Um, I'll take bits and pieces from famous paintings from art history, from people that have inspired me. Um, you might have even seen some aspects of Pierre Bonnard. He's like my favorite. Um, he's like the most, I don't know, blissful color palettes you can imagine. He's so free. with his color. Um, and so I would say, I think, to go back to your original question, now that I'm remembering what it was, like, where am I drawing inspiration from? It's my surroundings, but I'm also taking pieces from art history, people that have inspired me, fairy tales, textures, clothing, anything that feels like the sublime. I'm trying to create these environments that are places that I wish I could go to and be a part of. Because I have this weird idea that, like, if everything is perfect in your surroundings, the design, the positioning, everything is staged perfectly, then everything's going to go smooth in life. um, and and I want that very badly. But at the same time, I know that, like, you could be in the most beautiful hotel or garden or wherever, or your living room looks perfect, and your subconscious mind will fight what's happening. You might be in the most perfect situation, you could still not be happy. And and so something that I recognized in my work is that there's kind of this they're kind of these liminal in between spaces of, like, what I wish it could be, what I wish I could be surrounded by, um, or what I wish could happen, um, what I'm afraid might happen, combined with what's actual, what with reality. So it's kind of like the extreme of, like, the highest expectation, like the best thing you can think of, catastrophe, and then reality in the middle, all in the same scene. Yeah, so I think that's what I'm doing.
Tell me something. What was the hardest thing for you so far? What has been the hardest thing for you so far as an artist, um, to do in your own career, to build your own career?
The first thing that comes to mind is speed. Speed has always been, yeah, painting fast, because I have some obsessive tendencies. Because I think the fact that I'm trying to paint these almost perfect places is like a you know, it if it's a tendency of perfection, I guess, in uh, or an expectation. My paintings aren't perfect; they're quite sloppy up close, but they're detailed, but they're a little they're kind of crazy, and so I think I have this just high expectation of what I want the painting to be, and I also want to revel in the process and enjoy it. So speed has been an my enemy, because I would love to be a more prolific artist. But at the same time, would my paintings be mine? Would they look the way they did if I didn't have this kind of tug of war with time? But it is always a goal that's underlying some of my decisions of, like, how can I be an artist that makes a painting with a good painting that I'm proud of, with as little information as possible, something minimal. I'm a maximalist, but, like, could I have a lot of negative space in a piece? I don't know, but I hope one day I can figure it out.
I am trying to figure that out too. Me too.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's just, even though I feel like when I look at someone's work and I love their minimalism and I love, like, um, how just in so less they are able to do, like, and I think it's also something. I remember one of my friend who was seeing a discarded painting which was kept in the studio, and I'd just drawn, painted a little bit over it. And for me, it was, for a very long time I kept looking at it, and I kept saying, oh my god, it's such an unfinished piece, I haven't even worked on it. And then he came in and he said, oh wow, I love this painting, would you give it to me? And I was like, this is even I haven't even worked on it, like it hasn't even started. And I was like, I love it. And I think sometimes it's our perception, and I look at someone's work and I feel like I love how raw and edgy and unfinished and clean and or messy it is. versus when I know that I do it myself. For me, and I think that is, I was reading this somewhere, that um, the kind of art that you look at and you like. And for me, I love maximalism and minimalism both, but I'm a lot more fascinated sometimes with minimalist, because I feel like I have not been able to attempt that. And I think I was reading, like, the kind of art that you like will be very different from the kind of art that you will make, because you often like things that you will not be making yourself, and that is why there is this disparity.
That's really interesting. I'm trying to now think. I think I'm drawn to both.
Yeah,
Um,
me too. But I think
yeah,
I have several times attempted to have that control, and I'm like, for me, it's like, no, I want to try more. I want to try more. And then sometimes I make a mess out of it, which is completely fine. But for me to, I like the burst of like this things coming together. I think that really speaks to me.
definitely. I am in a similar position. Um, I think about like, I mean, sometimes I like, there's a lot of minimalist painting that I see. There's some that I see where I'm like, okay, that took them 2 seconds and it's selling for God knows how much. And I sometimes get a little frustrated. But I I think that I don't know, it's a self it takes a lot of restraint and self-control to not try. But I also think people like you and I are very brave because like we want to try everything. Like you want to make sure that you didn't lose your chance of finding out that answer. So I like to know every possible solution. 'Cause I don't know. This is morbid, but like, what if it's the last painting you make? I don't know. I want to know that I tried everything in my capacity to make it successful.
Okay, tell me something. How do you deal with disappointment? I think this, I haven't really asked this to a lot of people. How do you deal with self disappointment? I think this is something so I feel like I'm going through a period right now where, like periods of, I think there is, let me segregate these two. There is disappointment when you're working in something, and I feel like for me, when I'm constantly putting that effort, and even if I don't make it, and more than, I think at that point, once you're continually working on it, if you get in that flow state, it does not matter what you're working on it. You just keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going. But I feel like there are phases of disappointment from your own self where you feel like, um, you're struggling to get into that state, whatever those reasons could be. And you're always like, we are always self-critical, self-judging, that you are not, it's not anybody else's expectation, but it's your own expectations of where you want to, you want your work to be seen at. And I'm not talking about anything like your aspirations career, but just the sake of making something, like, and there's something like, um what you always want to make versus what you will make, there will always be a difference, because of your skill gap. And like, this is an evolution process. Like, you will always want something better than what you have, and then you work your skills towards that stage. But as an artist, how do you deal with this disappointment of, um within yourself sometimes, like, oh, I this is what I wanted, but I'm not able to get there yet, or my work is not looking, or it's not feeling that way. Do you feel that way sometimes? And how do you deal with that?
Definitely, it's been a long journey of trying to manage uh, those expectations, which is kind of what my paintings are about, which is like managing your expectations, and then in those scenes that I'm painting, and then at the same time, the process of painting, I have to do the same exact things. It's very meta. Um, and so some of my paintings are actually talking about the struggle of being an artist. There's some paintings where I have a painting where my arms are stretched out, like just like reaching straight out, like I'm Superman, because I'm trying to convince myself that I am powerful and confident. And my easel is behind me in the painting, and I'm clearly not. The easel's all flimsy, painted all kind of delicate and wobbly. Um, and so this topic of like, who am I as an artist does creep in as a narrative to a lot of my work, and I do find it the psychology and managing it really interesting as an artist. So I like this question. It definitely, to be honest, would affect my mood for the entire day if the painting was not working well. If I just kept redoing the same thing over and over, I would be pretty grumpy. And I would have to talk about it in therapy. Like sometimes, like the therapy session would turn into how do I deal with my inability to get what I want in my paintings. Um, and I would say a couple of things helped improve it. Um, One was, well, less pressure on yourself. I think once you are in the real art world and you're exhibiting your work, the pressure becomes a little bit greater. If you're not living off of your sales of artwork, I think there it helps a little bit if you have another source of income so that every brushstroke doesn't feel so catastrophic if you mess up. But honestly, the biggest thing that has been helpful to me is to plan the paintings more carefully. And the digital art, which I hated growing up, ended up being like my lifesaver. I am I'm obsessive and free in my digital paintings. I make like 20 different versions of my paintings before I actually start painting. But then once I start painting, um, I have a pretty good idea of what I want it to look like. But I also still have to translate these like digital brush strokes into oil paint now. And so there's an element of surprise still where I can still get excited and not bored, um, because I'm not, painting it exactly, but I have a little bit more of a guideline. And for me, that has been really helpful. I think, and especially when you work on wood panel and you sand them and they need to be super smooth. When I would mess up on a panel and I didn't have the painting planned because they were kind of spontaneous, it was a big deal. I'd have to sand it off. I paid a ton of money to have the wood panel made, and it was just really, really kind of devastating. um, and now, if I have a little bit of a better idea of where I'm going with the painting, the risk is lower that I'll mess up. Yeah, those are two things that are helping me struggle. Another, and one psychologist I saw years ago actually said, I would like you to just sit with the works that the paintings that you don't like get used to the discomfort of looking at them. Don't turn them facing the wall, which is what I would do. um, and work on a different painting. Don't just stay there working on the same painting. Switch to another piece, which was something that was very, very hard for me. And I watch and it's funny because you can help other artists. And as a art instructor, I see my students do this all the time where I'm like, you're done, don't ruin it, or let's just switch to another thing. And they want to fix it in the moment. And I understand that.
What about your role as an art teacher and your role as an artist? How do you think both of these help you? And you've also, in the beginning, you also spoke about the idea that um, the idea that we do not have to just be one kind of artist that people expect you out of, like um, living off your art or all of those things. What was your biggest myth that you had, and that you had to break for yourself about being an artist? Let's start with that. Then I'll ask my next question.
Well, I always knew it was hard. My original dream was to be a painting. I teach high school and middle school. Originally, I was very set on teaching college, and so I was a painting professor for about 7 years, and I absolutely loved it. Um, but I made it pays less, especially if you're part time, than teaching younger students. Maybe because the college students are easier to work with. I don't know, and it's less days a week. Um, and so I thought, I think my biggest myth was more towards like what the life of a professor would be. Um, and like, well, I think I didn't realize how unstable the career was and how much pressure there is when you're up for tenure to try to make your to try to get tenure. Um, and so while I absolutely love teaching college, I think that that cutthroat environment was not. Um, and well, it was fine, but to it's very competitive, and I did have a full time job in my last year of teaching college, and it was great, but it was just a 1 year contract, so it gets very unstable, and I think I didn't know that going in, and so I always wanted something stable to help support my art career. Um, and so I had no idea that being a professor was going to be so insane.
You do feel differently now being not in a college and teaching younger kids.
Yeah, the community is better. Yeah, and it's a little bit more stable, but it takes more time. Um, and and you have to deal with disciplinary issues, which can be very frustrating sometimes.
But also, I think inspiring and refreshing because I feel like younger children are such a great source of inspiration. The ability to ask questions unhindered and like to see things from a very unfiltered perspective, to have a very strong but naive, but also have that strength in that naivety. And I think that self conviction, a lot of things that I feel like I didn't have children in my life as like a couple of years ago, but ever since I've had my niece and nephew, I feel like I'm very pretty close to my niece, and she's very young now. But I just feel like I feel I learned so much from her because how unapologetic, but yet so kind. But like I think there's so much that we learn just as in values also from children that sometimes we do not learn from each other as adults as well.
Definitely, definitely. And and working with trying to teach them the skills outside of art, just like how to exist in the world as a good human and interpersonal relationships, all those things come into play, and then make you reflect on yourself as and you ask yourself, am I actually doing the things that I am telling my students to do? So it's a good check in on myself, for sure.
Thank you so much, Ali. It was so nice speaking to you. And before I let you go, what are you working on right now? Is there a project that you want to share with us? Something that's coming up?
Well, I'm developing a new body of work, so you'll probably see sneak peeks of those on Instagram. Still based on, I'm like behind on my. I have so many paintings planned from all my travels that I have so many to catch up on. So you'll be seeing a lot of those, and they're. I'm kind of taking these photographs and recreating the memory, like so that it either reflects what I was feeling in that moment or what I'm feeling now that I reflect on that moment. And a lot of that is through color and through the gesture of the figure. So yeah, there's a couple of new works coming along. I try not to post them until like the show, the full image, until the show is coming up. Um, and just yeah, I've got a whole slew of new panels that I just had built, and I'm ready to do it.
Okay. For anyone who's listening, where can they follow you, support you, look at your work?
Oh yes. Well, my Instagram is Ali, Ali Miller, Miller Studios with an S. Um, and so is my website, but that hasn't been updated in a few years because I'm going to redo the whole thing. But that's alimillerstudios.com.
Perfect. I will add everything in the show notes for everyone who's joined us for this episode and who wants to, read more about Ali's work, look at her work. Make sure you head on to the website at www.artsthroughheartsproject.com and you look at the article. You'll find everything there in detail with all the links mentioned. And again, thank you so much, Ali, and thank you everyone who joined us for this conversation today.
Thank you so much. This was super fun.